There are about 1 billion YouTube videos on mispronunciation, and they're universally awful, and hilariously, most of them mispronounce words they're telling you you're mispronouncing. But this isn't going to be one of those. I'm going to be talking about the words whose issues are so fundamental, no one even considers them. You are honestly mispronouncing this. It doesn't rhyme with liking. It rhymes with licking. The word is Viking. The problem is that second letter isn't really an I. It's supposed to have an accent over it, which would make it a long I. If you don't believe me, in Icelandic, the closest language to Old Norse we have, it's pronounced Vikinga. And even in Italian, it's properly pronounced Vikingo. But considering this is a Celtic nod and this is a Celtic not, these guys are probably okay. It would seem near impossible to mess up an acronym, right? Actually, it's not an acronym, it's an initialism, but more on that in a second. But again, despite how they look, those aren't really C's and that's not a P. Slavic nations use a different alphabet than the West, Cyrillic. It's entirely coincidental that they look like English letters. It could just as easily have been pronounced correctly. The Cyrillic initialism for USSR was SSS, R. This one's controversial. This one is an acronym for Graphics Interchange Format. Therefore, it's reasoned that since graphics has a hard G, so should GIF. But the inventor has said that it should be pronounced GIF, and he's tired of people mispronouncing it. But the Oxford English Dictionary has said that it's beyond the software engineer's control to determine how the word should be said. Both are accepted, but many classicists will tell you, regardless of what the inventor thinks, it's GIF. But why is this an acronym? It's pronounceable as a word. SSSR and FBI are strings of letters, so they're initialisms. NASA, laser, sonar. Those are all pronounceable as words, so they're acronyms. Apparently some people get this wrong, especially in the United Kingdom. It's pronounced Roosevelt. Although in a bizarre foreshadowing of the GIF-GIF controversy, in 1903, the chairman of the Department of Reading and Speech Culture of the New York Teachers Association wrote a letter to the New York Sun accusing President Roosevelt of mispronouncing his name, saying, "What is there to justify him in his endeavor to perpetuate a practice against which are set the principles of usage?" The issue is he wanted the OO sound to be like room instead of rose, and thus pronounced it Roosevelt. Roosevelt's uncle replied, "It is rather a dangerous proceeding to assume that a man does not know how to pronounce his own name," and wrote a little poem highlighting the ways to get the oo sound in English. "To do this he may have to feel blue before I get through, and you may find him in a stew too, and still the wonder grew that one small head could muddle all he knew." The problem is that the name is Dutch, and Roosevelt is consistent in Dutch. But at the time, Roosevelt was described as having the most mispronounced name in the world. Here are some examples. And staying with the Dutch, the correct Dutch pronunciation is Vincent van Gogh. But it's almost impossible for English speakers to get right, and supposedly in the Netherlands they use our attempts at trying as a kind of national joke. But Dutch names aren't the only ones we can't pronounce. Over time, pronunciations change. Fully 2/3 of Shakespeare's sonnets contain words that were intended to rhyme, but don't because of changes in pronunciation. Like the word time. In the 14th century, it was pronounced team. Shakespeare pronounced it tame, and we now pronounce it time. Caesar is another example. We say the names of ancient Romans like we would pronounce them in our own languages, with no regard for how they were originally said. But if you took a time machine back to ancient Rome, you would ask to meet Iulius Caesar. There is no J and there is no soft C in classical Latin. And for the German fans out there, it's the exact same word as Kaiser. In fact, during the First World War, it was tongue-in-cheekly suggested that this explained why Germany had an empire and Italy didn't. Germany and Rome were powerful because they had hard Cs. Italians had developed a soft C, which made their people soft. But keeping with the characters in Shakespeare's Iulius Caesar, it should be Cicero, Octavius, and Brutus. And staying with the Latin kick for one more minute, the constellation is not the great Irish folk hero Danny Orion. It's Orion. And finishing up, how pedantic do you want to be? Quoting the 14th century author Chaucer, "Why, that I rente out of his book a leaf, for which he smote me, so that I was deaf." Deaf was originally pronounced to rhyme with leaf. In fact, it's rather peculiar why one letter makes such a difference. But it's a pretty modern change. In 1896, a letter asking about this new pronunciation appeared in the Boston Journal. Until the late 19th century, Americans said deef. From what was referred to as Anglomania, parts of America adopted the trendy British pronunciation of deaf. And that linguistic interloper completely supplanted the much older pronunciation. So if you're the type of person who thinks that irregardless isn't a word or that something I do really well is my fort, you'd better start pronouncing it deef. But deep down, deaf or gif, those don't matter. Pronunciations change as time goes by. Van Gogh, Kaiser, Roosevelt, those were real people's names, and if we're referring to them, we should at least try to get their names right. Well, I'm off to get Kaiser roll on my Caesar salad, and remember, this too may be wrong. A while ago, there was a bit of bother on Jeopardy regarding pronunciation. Hit it.
In 1884, Maud Watson won the first women's singles tennis competition at this British venue. Reed.
What is Wimbledon?
Yes. Before I ask you to make a wager, we have to take some money away from you, Reed. I'm informed that you very clearly said Wimbledon, not Wimbledon a few moments ago, so you're losing $800.
Sadly, both are wrong, and I'm not splitting hairs on the pronunciation of Wimbledon. They asked for the venue. This is what happens at Wimbledon. Wimbledon Stadium is a greyhound track. The answer should have gone,
at this British venue.
What is the All England Lawn Tennis and Croquet Club located in Wimbledon District, London? Caesar is the name of the salad, and only the salad. Named after Caesar Cardini, an Italian immigrant living in Tijuana.